which isn't always pleasant. Like I say, creating is not always a pleasant process, and we shouldn't assume that everyone who does this kind of thing is in some kind of sublime state, because they're not. There's all sorts of struggles and frustrations that go hand in hand with it. But I think your capacity to deal with that and see it through to the end is what matters.
They're suffering, they're either depressed or they're anxious, they've got something up with them, and they're creative people, but all of a sudden, for whatever reason, they can no longer be creative anymore. I've actually spoken to a friend of mine recently as well, who's like, since taking this particular journey, he was a brilliant writer, since taking this journey, he can no longer write, he's got writer's block. And I've seen people across all different creative things talking about this, but like, I can't do it anymore. So it could be writer's block, it could be I can no longer paint, or I just don't have the energy for it anymore, whatever's connecting you to that creative impulse seems to have gone. So, how can people get that back?
I'd probably approach that by thinking in a biopsychosocial way, actually. You mentioned about maybe they're just too exhausted even to do anything. If you start at the bottom with the chassis and make sure that you're at optimum physical health, that's probably a good place to start. Because everything else springs from that. I mean, obviously some people do create when they're exhausted, and they drive themselves, and they push and push and push. And I think when that happens, again, we get into the realm of the red shoes, where, there may be some creating going on, but it's in the wrong direction, or it's excessive, and it's going to just, it's not necessarily going to have a very good outcome. So I think although people do create and do push themselves to create when they're exhausted, it's probably nonetheless a bad idea. So I think that would be a good starting point. And obviously I don't know the background to some of the people who are complaining of this, but I think you have to at least try and address that. Then, of course, there's the psychological side of it. And from my own experience, I would say that creating isn't always a pleasant experience. It can be fraught with frustration. It can be interrupted by a whole manner of things, including just everyday life. And I think where that happens, it can be very, very difficult to apply yourself. Very difficult indeed. But I think if you think everybody else is out there and just doing it naturally day upon day upon day without any kind of a break or any kind of what would be the right word, any kind of inhibition to doing it, then you're probably fooling yourself. I think everyone who creates goes through difficult times. So I think you need to, if you are feeling that way, look at how you can find the reserves, again, presuming that you're properly rested and all that's taken care of, to overcome that resistance in yourself, to make that final effort, if you like. If it's something that, say, not necessarily something that you haven't started yet, but something that you might have already started but you're finding difficult to complete, to make that extra effort to do that. I mean, from my own understanding of it, I'd probably refer it back to the handmade life again, and this idea that you have to work at it, you have to craft it, sometimes even when you don't feel like it. Or it might be that you're surrounded by people, by family, by friends who don't allow you the space to create or make it difficult for you to create. So you might have to reappraise some of those things, some of those relationships. And then thirdly, we think about the social, environmental aspects of things. You might have to look at the place in which you're doing the creating, whether or not that's conducive for you to create in. Could you improve the environment in which you create in some way to facilitate that? So I think if you take a systems approach to it, and therefore look at what level you might be experiencing a block. It might be all three, or it might just be focused in one, but having ramifications in the other. I think that's probably a good place to start. If you at least have a framework in which to try and understand why you're stuck in the first place.
I like that.
I don't know how it would affect you, Stick, because you write as opposed to draw, but I don't know that you, would you say you experience writer's block? I've not seen that in you. Usually pretty engaged with the process, aren't you?
Yeah, I think how I tackle that is different to perhaps the question, if you know what I mean. It's a little bit like when dreams dry up, I would think. If you're working clinically with someone and then there's a whole series of dreams and they just stop, there's a resistance then, obviously, from the psyche to giving you anything at that point. And it's almost like a, right, what now from you? So you have to do something to kick that off, that the psyche is then prepared to say that you've integrated that lesson, you can move on. So I think it's something similar, but not necessarily the same answer. There's probably a resistance in the material, in other words, in the medium, that the creator is working with. And if someone's embarking on, as you say, this journey, and they find their creativity has started to attenuate, it's probably because the libido that was going into the creativity has shifted over into this. And if that's not realized and integrated as such, they'll worry about the creativity stopping and not be more, should we say, happy with the idea that they're making progress in another way. So if they want to get the creativity back, then they should link the creativity to the process, because that's what the psyche seems to be saying. It's saying that when you were doing it before, you weren't actually moving on, but now you are, because you definitely committed to this path. So libido ducked it away. If you then bring the creativity in sync with what you're doing, it will probably unfold again, and you'll find that you're going like this rather than like that. So if you connect it to your journey consciously, in a relaxed, accepting way, and there are simple ways of doing this, using imagery, using techniques that you're familiar with, for example, James, about logging on and accessing the psyche in a completely open way. If we think about the way we were discussing active imagination and hypnosis in another little short podcast that we did, it's similar to that. You know, if you ask in the right way, you'll get a helpful response. But if you generate further fantasy, which is an ego fantasy that stands between you and the unconscious, it won't like it. It'll just let you run away with a merry dance, and you won't get where you want to go. If you speak to it on its own terms, which is a very different thing, you're likely to get a response. And one of the best ways of doing that is to step back and say, what's happened? Or what's happened is creativity is stopped for a while at least. But you've changed yourself. You're doing something that's different. Does that mean that these two things are completely separate? Were they on parallel lines? Have I neglected one and developed the other? I would go with this hypothesis, the last one, that you've neglected one and moved forward without it. So test that as an experiment and say, I'll incorporate this with what I'm doing now consciously, and gently just signal to the psyche internally that that's your intention, to use the creativity on this journey, and ask it to allow you to do it. Literally ask it to allow. If you do that, you're paying it respect. If you start demanding like a child who says, it's all stopped, what's going on? You know, won't listen to you. You can transfer not only externally in terms of your ego and its frustrations and its adaptations and maladaptations externally onto someone, you can also transfer onto the objective psyche on the inside. You can literally transfer your own frustrations at that, and it will know, because it will treat that as disrespect. And this is something which is an insight that does come from long experience with hypnotherapy, the right kind of hypnotherapy that's connected. I haven't so far had a writer's block at all.
I don't recall that happening.
Not at all. And that's like with a lot of novels and a lot of scripts and very, very intense experience. And I believe that that's because I did not treat it as something separate to the rest of my work. It was part of the work. And because I allowed the creativity to come through and express itself, but in concert with an intention not to control the creativity, so it's a process, but there is an outcome of which I am unfamiliar, but I'm offering to act as a medium for the creativity to come out and express itself. Then you're not offering any ego resistance, and it'll just come through. So that's a hypothesis that if it were me, I would test.
But you do apply yourself.
Oh yeah, I do.
When you set out to do it, you do apply yourself, and you do, you keep going until it's completed.
Oh, I do. Yeah.
You don't just get part way through and shelve something and leave it and come back 6 months later. You see it through. In fact, the expression that you use, it's a bit like eating a porcupine.
Oh yeah,
which is a useful one.
It's a bit of self-talk, if you like, or that when people ask me what it's like, I say it's like eating a porcupine. But you can't stop once you start until you've eaten and digested every one of those quills.
Yes.
And that's not disrespectful to the psyche. That's like saying, I know you're putting me under that pressure. And that's the image that I use to myself and use to justify the process to others in a brief form, to say they understand I have to go through this process. So that's an engagement with the psyche. Now, if it were a different kind of writing, if it were, not creative as such, but it was a task that was imposed by a third party, say, and it was like, you have to do this because you're going to meet whatever responsibility, I'd feel a lot more inertia over that. Because my unconscious is probably going to say, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to be creative, because we're insisting, we as in it and all the elements in the unconscious are going to insist that you do that. And we won't let you do anything else until you've done what we want you to do. And if you resist, we'll make you neurotic. There's that side of the creative process as well.
Yeah, and there's that side of it as well with just general work that I found too. So this is a massive part of procrastination, I think, to sort of bring that in as a little element. So I've been asked to talk about that as well.
Yes,
a lot of that is, like we have the assumption that you can sit and you can do a task, but that's an assumption. And I've noticed that it's not something you can really do. Like if I took, I don't know, I'll use my mother as an example, right? She's never liked science, and I always have liked science. If I said to her, you have to learn science, she's not going to do it. No matter what the incentive is, unless, I gave her a proper threat, she wouldn't do it. Because her psyche's going, no. And it's the same thing with me, with, say, painting or something like that. Yeah. It's like, no, it's just not going to happen. I want to make a point, though, on psychological stress as well, because this is something that's come up in my own therapeutic work. Because Pauline, you were saying about the biopsychosocial model, and there's all this, you need to recharge biologically.
Yes.
And of course, this is hot off the heels of the Charing Cross method, of course, which will help you do that.
Yes.
You can also have stress psychologically, because if someone, I was thinking in sort of meta terms with this, if someone's reaching out to write us a comment, like several people have, in terms of creativity, which is why we're making this video, then presumably they're in a state where they really want help.
Yes.
Right? And so if they really want help to the point where they're actually going to reach out to us, which of course we're honoured that they'd want to do that, there's probably a lot of psychological stress that's actually built into them not doing the creativity, which is similar to what you're saying, Steve, where the energy is going to be ducting off elsewhere. So it's all those other things to sort of relax into the process as well, because you definitely can't force yourself to do things. I've learned that. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, yes, but it's also equally easy to be distracted into other things that might appear to be more appealing at a given time. So, I think, as we've said before, and other things, it's like, look over here, the sparkly thing that's happening over here, because to actually have to apply yourself to your craft is an effort. It's something that you, to some extent, you have to overcome your own resistance to doing that when something else, is being proposed that you might feel is more appealing in the moment. So what do? You have a choice to make at that point. And if you choose to go over there and engage with the sparkly thing, then there's a tendency to neglect your craft. Or to procrastinate and say, well, I'll do this other thing now because I feel that that's what I want to do. It might make me feel better, and I'll come back to the drawing, the writing, the painting, the whatever, next week or next month or whatever. And before you know it, you're 6 months down the road or longer, and you haven't applied yourself. So I do think that idea of application, of continuing to craft, because that's part of the handmade life, it's about how much of yourself you invest in something, is a very important idea. It's I guess it's akin to a kind of a self-discipline, really, isn't it? Which isn't always pleasant. Like I say, creating is not always a pleasant process.
No.
And we shouldn't assume that everyone who does this kind of thing is in some kind of sublime state, because they're not.
No.
There's all sorts of struggles and frustrations that go hand in hand with it. But I think your capacity to deal with that and see it through to the end is what matters.
Yeah. And it won't be an element of forcing. If you see what I mean, to try and make that kind of distinction, because your creativity is going to come out of you anyway, and as you're saying, it doesn't have to be a pleasant thing, but you're meant to do it. If it's true creativity, that's my understanding anyway, you're meant to do it, right? Rather than
but
doing
it doesn't
a random
mean
thing.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean it doesn't come without a struggle.
Sure, definitely.
And that might mean some kind of wrestling with yourself. It might mean that you have to prioritize, certain things in your life in a different way in order to do it. It might mean that there are people around you who are toxic to you, who are preventing you from doing it, who don't appreciate what you're doing or the time you need to spend on it. And you might need to cut loose from them in some way, or you might simply need to assert the fact that you need the time to do what you need to do, or you're going to become ill in some way, or so frustrated that life won't be worth living anyway. So I think you have to look at it from all angles and see the kinds of things that might be impediments and do your best to clear them out of the way. But also, like I say, not to have rose-coloured glasses on about these things, because nothing of any value really comes without some kind of a struggle. I mean, I know myself when I've been drawing, and I've kind of reached an impasse, and I thought, oh God, I'm so sick of this. I just like to give up now. And very often at the point of resignation, of actually saying, right, I'm going to give up now and doing it in this way, something else comes through unexpected that breathes new life into it. You suddenly get a new angle on things. Or, I mean, for example, people who paint and draw, sometimes literally in the process of painting or drawing, they'll rotate their work round either on the table or the easel or wherever they happen to be working, just to get a new perspective. So if I'm doing portraits, for example, I'll often turn it upside down, and then you see it literally see it from a whole new angle, and then that can breathe fresh life into it, and off you go on your way again. So there are all sorts of things I think that you can do and that you can attend to make that creative experience better for yourself and to make it flow better and more easily, notwithstanding, like I say, the difficulties that are inherent in that process anyway.